into some of the tensions in Ottawa surrounding the Conservative Party losing 2 of its MPs. To recap, Nova Scotia MP Chris D'Entremont was first to exit in a rather dramatic fashion. He crossed the floor to join the Liberals following the unveiling of the federal budget. He has since told CBC that Conservative leadership, quote, barging into his office and yelling then sealed the deal for his defection. Days later, Alberta MP Matt Jeneroux resigned, citing family reasons, but a Liberal source told the CBC he met with Mark Carney earlier that week. But Jeneroux told media that coercion played no role in his decision to leave federal politics. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre took to the podium for the first time today since the 2 departures. He said he maintains his resolve for the Conservative Party's priorities and then proceeded to hone in on D'Entremont's previous statements about the Liberal Party.
Say anything about your leadership? Have you maybe reflected on your leadership style moving forward?
No, my plan is to continue to lead and be the only leader in the country that's fighting for an affordable Canada where our people who work hard can afford a home and food. That is my agenda. And I will just quote Mr. D'Entremont when he speaks about Mark Carney. He says, after 6 months under a new Prime Minister who promised financial discipline, Canadians are still waiting. He said that he would be judged by the cost of groceries at the store. Well, Canadians are judging him, and they are not impressed. He said this only a few months ago. Since the Liberals came to power, food prices are up 40%. We have heard it many times here today. It is deliberate and it is unacceptable. It is inhumane, said Mr. D'Entremont, for a G7 country. So he said that Liberal food price inflation under Mark Carney was inhumane, and I couldn't agree more. And I feel badly for the inhumane conditions, to use his own words, that he is now supporting for his own constituents.
The Prime Minister, meanwhile, will be in BC this week to provide more details about Canada's economic strategy to combat U.S. tariffs. CBC News has learned that Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to announce a second set of nation-building projects tomorrow in BC. The federal government continues to push for liquefied natural gas, and one of the projects slated to be announced will be the Ksi Lisims LNG project by Prince Rupert. It's being developed jointly by the Ksi Lisims government, Rockies LNG Partners, and Western LNG. And it would involve a floating LNG facility near Prince Rupert that would move gas to Asian markets. So we're asking you, what do you think of the current push for LNG projects? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. You can also leave a comment on our TikTok Live. And joining us now is Stewart Muir. He's the president and CEO of Resource Works, a proponent of Canada's natural resource industry. Good afternoon to you, Stewart. Thanks for coming into the studio. So both the federal and provincial governments are backing LNG projects to help boost its economic strategy. First, let's get your reaction to this LNG project coming here to BC.
Yeah, this has been in the works for a long time. It's a way to take gas that we have in British Columbia in the northeast, move it across the province to the coast, put it on ships, and send it to where people will pay us good money for it because they need that gas as a cleaner alternative to grow their economies in the way that they choose. So this is a great way for Canada to fit in with its natural advantages while boosting Indigenous participation in the economy and also meeting our own climate goals.
And when we hear about the economic benefits this project will bring to BC, what would that look like?
Well, in the last 10 years, we've seen a number of major projects, and I think a lot of people might have firsthand experience of what it was like when there were so many paychecks and people were buying homes, people had jobs going into, they were trained into really good trades and all kinds of professional. We'll see more of that. The Ksi Lisims project, by various estimates, with the pipeline needed to supply it, is about $20 billion, probably $20 billion US. And the way projects go, these numbers have a way of rising over time. But that amount of economic stimulation really just flows through the whole economy, even to the lower mainland.
And then I guess from an environmental perspective, because it is where we see a lot of pushback, the environmental impact that this could have, were there to be any accidents. How do you sort of respond to that trade-off between economic priorities for BC and environmental priorities for the area?
And that's what a lot of people are thinking. But for me, where it starts is, do we have regulations that can be trusted, that are trustworthy? And after all we've been through to implement regulations, whether it's in how the gas is sourced, how it's moved, how it's processed, how it's shipped, are you confident? I would just ask people, are you confident? Are you feeling confident we have that? And if you are, then you should be okay with it. But the other layer of it is that the First Nations themselves, the Nisga'a First Nation in the Nass River Valley, north of Prince Rupert, have a cherished homeland that they've occupied for more than 10,000 years. I've spoken to the leadership there. They want to keep the pristine nature of their environment, and they believe they also have an economic opportunity here to grow that, and they think they can make it work. So do we trust them to do that?
Okay, we've got the phone lines filling up very quickly, Stewart, so we'll head to those. First, we'll go to Des in Prince Rupert. Hi, Des.
Good afternoon.
And what are your thoughts on this LNG project?
Well, I think this is extremely short-sighted on the part of the Canadian government with regards to this particular initiative. We continue to drive fossil fuels as our main initiative economically, and that is just wrong. This is not going to provide the economic stimulus that some would say. A lot of this money ends up leaving the country, and really, in terms of long-term relationships and work within the area, that tends to be short and usually limited in a couple of hundred full-time jobs over the course of time. I'm also extremely concerned with regards to our drive to continue to take methane out of the ground and believe it to be the saving grace and our opportunity to switch from fossil fuels over to more clean energies. And I think that is, again, very short-sighted. Canada has an opportunity here now to really build on their profile in terms of an energy leader. And we see it all over the world where other countries are moving away from fossil fuels in great rates and continuing to drive their economies through green energy sources, both wind and tidal and solar. And China, which is, of course, one of the largest emitters, is the world leader at the moment. And here we are sitting with a very old, outdated oil economy, very short-sighted on the part of government, and very short-sighted in terms of our relationship with this planet and our ability to continue to live on it.
All right, Des, I thank you for that. And Stewart, what is your reaction to Des's thoughts about it being short-sighted?
Well, energy is complex. In China, they're also spending, over the last 5 years, $500 billion in new oil and gas development. But here in Canada, we've watched the International Energy Agency go from only, in recent months, predicting the hasty exit of fossil fuels from our lives to updating their projections. And they're now saying, wait a minute, we were wrong. It's actually going the other direction. That's the reality of how people are consuming fuel in their lives. So how do we get the best choices? Is every choice perfect? It's a complex world out there.
But is there not an argument to be made that we should perhaps focus more on the newer, more environmentally friendly options such as solar or tidal or wind? Where are we at with that in Canada?
I think in BC, the British Columbia government has, in their project list, announced a number of wind projects. I think it's 7 or 8. There's a solar project. So to say that commitment is not there, I think would be overlooking something that is real and happening.
And as Des mentioned, sort of in terms of that short term, we hear about the job numbers, but quite often they are not sustainable because it's to get it built and up and running. Those jobs do disappear. How many jobs do you think this would be creating?
Well, in the Nass River Valley, in the domain of the Nisga'a, they don't have a lot of opportunities for well-paying full-time jobs around the whole year, period. To have one is quite something. To have, as he says, a couple of hundred, actually, that's a real game changer. But the thing is, it's not just what happens at the coast. All the way up and down the pipeline, it has to be environmentally shepherded and observed. And also the gas has to be sourced, and that creates constant jobs over the whole life of the project. So that supply chain runs all across the province.
And I do want to take another call, but another point that he made was, we need to sort of focus on those very real environmental problems. And if we have the infrastructure to deal with those, if something were to happen, if there was the worst case scenario, what situation would BC be in to deal with that?
Well, I think on the marine side, which is what we all feel the most immediate about because we associate that with killer whales and salmon, the pristine waters. When you look at the stewardship by the First Nation in this modern era with the tools they have, and you see associating the future that the Nisga'a leadership has talked about from this project, they're going to be protecting their territory, including those waters. And then we have a first-class regulatory system all the way up and down. I mean, Canada is as good as it gets. So do we trust our rules?
I'll take another call if that's okay. Eugene in Port Angeles. Hi, Eugene. Thanks for calling BC today. What are your thoughts on the LNG project?
I think I could say a no-brainer. It's a situation where economically and jobs, skills, you just have to do it. Natural gas. Oil is tougher and more dangerous to ship, and it should be refined at home. But the problem really is that you didn't do your R&D. Canada, like us, worse. America, worse. China has the battery in about 5 different ways, and that's the cost of a car. They have the rare earth elements and the methods, very secret, obviously. They have the solar panel to such an extent that they have almost approached perpetual motion. That is, it's hard, electrically intensive to make the polysilicon that makes the solar panel, and they have so many panels that they make the electricity to make more polysilicon, and that is an important thing, that we don't have these things, and Canada has to tide themselves over economically and intensely have a Manhattan Project for the things that China has. And last thing, the unfortunate situation is China is going to be your ally in a way if you're smart, Canada. And I'm not anti-American. I just hate our leadership. Okay.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Both parties.
Okay.
Both parties here.
Thank you for that, Eugene.
Thank you very much.
Stewart, thoughts on Eugene?
Well, China does want our LNG. They're a major partner in the one that just opened this year. Why? Because they want more energy in their system. They also believe that coal is a fuel that they should use less of, and natural gas is an easy alternative in those energy systems. It's not as if they're not going to be using any of those. But I think the first point.
But some analysts do say that they project that the LNG that use will go down in China. So is this short term or long term that we're talking?
Well, we're looking at the growth areas of East Asia, including China, and those economies are looking for reliable, affordable, environmentally acceptable energy. And for those three things, when you put them together, LNG, like no other source of energy, supplies the answer. But for LNG here, I think it's a way to be part of the future economy of the world, because while we were working through our complex regulatory system that needs some fixes, the U.S. went from having no LNG exports 12 years ago to being the world's biggest LNG exporter. And some of that is with Canadian gas that they're selling for greater value.
All right, we've got another call that's come in. I knew this would be a talker. Sam in Vancouver. Hi, Sam. Thanks for calling in the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course.
I'm going to start by saying that your guest has a point. China there is a market in China for our natural gas. However, I'll agree with your first caller as well in saying that it's quite a short-sighted move to push for this, because China is greening its economy quite quickly. They have a need for this natural gas now, but not necessarily in the future. also, we know the environmental impacts of continuing to use and exploit fossil fuels. And if we want to build a nation for the future, we really should be building a greener future. There's really, I don't think it's a good idea for the environment. I don't think it's a good idea economically either. I think we should be building things that are more long-term and environmentally sustainable. And, if we produce natural gas to suffice our own needs in our country as we transition, sure. But to go and export it, I don't think that we should be doing that. And, exports are always vulnerable to changing whims of other countries, right? We've seen the issues down south with Donald Trump, and we know that China can also sometimes put retaliatory measures when there are issues. So, we should be developing what we need here instead of exporting fossil fuels out of the country.
Well, thank you for calling in and joining the discussion. I do want to get to a couple more calls that we've had come in. This one from Jennifer in Vancouver as well. Hi, Jennifer. Jennifer, are you with us?
Oh, yeah. Can you not hear me?
I can now. So what are your thoughts on this LNG project?
I agree with all of the concerns regarding environmental impact, absolutely. And with this one in particular, I'm concerned about foreign ownership. My Western, the partner is Western, whatever it is, they're based in Texas, and they are the controlling partners. So at a moment when we are in active confrontation with a nation that is joking and talking about expanding into our space, why would we surrender control over any infrastructure at all to their business interests?
All right, thank you for that point, Jennifer. And yes, we know that the project is, or the co-owner of the project, based in Texas, and being that we are in the midst of this trade war and this contentious relationship with the U.S., how do we sort of justify, business in BC being so closely tied to a business in the U.S.?
Well, after 40 years of NAFTA, we are pretty integrated in our continental system, and so are the financial structures and investments. That's just the way that things have evolved. So if there's someone in Texas or Pennsylvania, I know there's a firefighters pension fund in Philadelphia I met years ago that was really interested in investing here. Are we opposed to that because they're in that city? But the most important thing here to me is that when we export things, it's for a reason. It's so we can import things, import the things we need, because the people who send us those things, be they iPhones or vaccines or orange juice, have a way of insisting on being paid with hard currency. Yes. And we need to get that money, and we get it from exports.
Okay. Email that's come in from Jim Pine. It says, the greenwashing LNG industry would have you believe that LNG is less harmful than coal. A peer-reviewed study from October 2024 states that when you account for all of the fossil fuels burnt to build the roads to fracking sites, moving the gas to LNG ports, the fuel spent in shipping it, and the fugitive methane released is worse than the burning coal. And that is from Jim. And Stewart, do we need to perhaps dig deeper into the long-term and short-term environmental impacts that are potential here?
Yes, of course we do. And I saw that study, and on closer inspection, it proved to be nothing to do with British Columbia, our regulations, our geology, our situation. It was from someplace in the U.S. And I guess if we're not supposed to import things from the U.S., let's not include misinformation from the U.S. For starters. But I think we are all concerned because everyone in BC, when you do a poll, sees themselves as an environmentalist. I certainly do, and I'm sure you do. And are we feeling confident that we have the rules, regulations, the people, the First Nations who are engaged for the right reasons in the right way to make this work? Let's ask ourselves that.
Another call that's come in from Franz in Cecil Lake. Hi, Franz. What are your thoughts on this project?
Well, I think it's a no-brainer. I think we need to put our own people to work. So everybody is always talking about diversifying. They don't like our neighbor to the south. And but that's the only option we have. if we want to ship our natural gas or whatever we have to the east, they say, nah, you want to ship it to the west? No. So what are we supposed to do? And, solar energy is awesome, and, so is wind.
Mm-hmm.
But today, the sun doesn't shine here where I live, and the wind doesn't blow. So are we supposed to freeze to death?
Fair enough.
And the last time I was in Vancouver, there was this snowfall there, and every chimney I saw, there was vapor coming out of there because they were burning natural gas. So I figured there would have been a good time to turn the valve down a little bit.
Franz, I really hate to...
turn the valve down a little bit, so let these people freeze, because...
Franz, I do hate to cut you off as we are right out of time, unfortunately, but I do understand your point. And Stewart, I wish we had longer to talk, but again, we're right up against the news. But thank you so much for coming
Thank you.
in.
Appreciate the chance.
That is Stewart Muir. He joined us here in studio. He's the president and CEO of Resource Works. It is 12:27, and this is BC Today. We had a special Remembrance Day show yesterday honoring the veterans, and we're sharing a little bit more of what you were reflecting on. A lot of calls came in with meaningful stories and histories to share, and we received some emails. Jennifer writes, thinking of my grandmother, her husband served in World War I, and her son, my father, in World War II. Can't imagine going through that twice. I never knew my grandfather, but I always remembered that my grandfather said he loved animals, and one of the things that traumatized him during the war was the horses being injured and having to be shot because they couldn't be helped. And Holly at Buce Creek Ranch says, my grandfather served in the Canadian Army in World War I. My father was in the Canadian Navy in World War II. My grandfather immigrated to Vancouver from Belfast around 1912. He enlisted in 1914 and was injured and recuperated in the Canadian Hospital in Berkshire, England. My grandmother lived there, and we think that is how they met. He was discharged and returned to Vancouver. He re-enlisted in 1917, we think, to get back to England and reconnect with my grandmother. He was sent to France and was gassed. He survived, married my grandmother, and they came to Vancouver. My father was born in February 1921, but by that time, the effects of my grandfather's injuries from the gas in France meant that he was in the Shaughnessy Veterans Hospital, where he succumbed in 1922. I'm looking now at the copper medallion that George V sent to my grandmother from Buckingham Palace. It says, I join with my grateful people in sending you this memorial of a brave life given for others in the Great War. Thank you for all of those sentiments. And this is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, and also on YouTube at CBC Vancouver and the CBC News app. It is 12:30, and that means it's time for the CBC Local News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Prime Minister Mark Carney is scheduled to arrive in Metro Vancouver today to promote some of the infrastructure investments announced in last week's federal budget. Tomorrow, he will travel to northwestern BC, where he will unveil the latest list of potential nation-building projects. That's expected to include the Ksi Lisims LNG project north of Prince Rupert. Vancouver's draft budget for next year is before City Council today. Mayor Ken Sim and his ABC party have proposed a 0% property tax increase, but that will require Council to find $120 million in savings or to come up with additional revenue. And the BC Real Estate Association says some home sales in the province fell more than 10% in October compared with the same period last year, but some regions have recovered to pre-tariff levels. The association says the MLS service recorded almost 6,400 residential units sales last month, down 10.2%. The average price, however, rose almost 1% to more than $978,000. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Periods of rain this afternoon with a high of 5. Highs reaching 2 with a mix of sun and cloud in the piece. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sunshine with a high of 2 as well. Highs up to 7 with showers in some areas of the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, cloudy with a high of 7. And rain this afternoon in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. A chance of showers in Greater Victoria with highs around 10. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much for that, Robert. And G7 foreign ministers meeting is taking place in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario. It's seen as a diplomatic test for ministers of foreign affairs, Anita Anand, as she tries to navigate the relationship between Ottawa and Washington. Earlier today, she announced more sanctions on Russia. It will take effect immediately, targeting those behind Russia's drone and cyber attacks on Ukraine, 100 vessels in Russia's sanctions-evading shadow fleet, and 2 Russian liquefied natural gas entities.
Canada has made it a priority to maintain and strengthen our support for Ukraine at every opportunity. Canada will continue to ensure that Russia's actions do not go unpunished. We firmly believe that continued collective pressure on Russia is necessary. That includes applying sanctions and other economic measures as a way to decrease Russia's revenues and degrade its military-industrial base.
The sanctions target 13 individuals and 11 entities. The news release said the move supports efforts by the G7 to ramp up economic pressure on Russia and is in broad alignment with similar actions by the United States, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. And we continue with our look at the impact Prime Minister Carney's nation-building projects could have on us here in BC. As we know, Mark Carney will announce the second round of projects his government considers nation-building tomorrow and will prioritize. CBC has learned that the Ksi Lisims LNG project here in BC will be on that list. So what do you think of the current push for expanded LNG as Canada fends off the impact of U.S. tariffs? Call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on our TikTok Live. And joining us now to continue this discussion is Thomas Green, Senior Manager for Climate Solutions with the David Suzuki Foundation. Now, the foundation has been firmly opposed to fossil fuel infrastructure expansion, including LNG pipelines on both climate and economic grounds. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us in studio as well.
Yeah, pleasure to be here today.
We had a lot of phone calls and emails in our first half. I suspect that will happen again. Before that, though, in your view, lay out what you feel are the most significant environmental risks that are associated with a large-scale federal project like this.
Well, 2 key things the International Panel on Climate Change has told us. We have no room for more fossil fuel infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't be building more. From a climate perspective, we're already bumping up to 1.5 C, so we're getting into very dangerous territory to keep expanding beyond that.
And you're referring, of course, to the temperature and how we are reaching that point of...
Yeah. And once we get beyond there, we can destabilize the climate and start to have these feedback loops. And in BC, we're already having a whole bunch of climate impacts. So it doesn't make sense to expand fossil fuel infrastructure, to export that LNG abroad, where it will be burned, and it will come back to haunt us in a boomerang effect in terms of more extreme weather, wildfires, et cetera.
Right.
And then there's the economic side, which the International Energy Agency just put out its latest World Energy Outlook, and it says we don't need more LNG infrastructure. We're actually going into a huge glut because all these countries are adding supply, and BC is a very high-cost producer. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why it's on the major projects list, because industry is not going ahead with these projects without our tax dollars subsidizing them.
And in terms of, I asked Stewart Muir, who was with us and is a proponent of the LNG pipeline, I asked him, how do we balance the need for the economic growth with the environmental impacts? And I ask you that, how do we protect the environment but still realizing and recognizing that we do need to become less reliant on places such as the US, and we do need to be self-sustaining and produce perhaps more income?
Well, we don't become more self-reliant by buying into a project or subsidizing a project owned by Wall Street bankers, where most of the profits are going to go externally. Most of the jobs are actually not in Canada, because most of this, it's a floating terminal. It's just going to be floated and parked. So it'll already have been built. All those construction or manufacturing jobs, they're not happening in Canada. So, and then we're worsening our climate situation when we've got really good investments we can be doing in Canada. And the other thing is the world is transitioning to renewables so quickly, and the world is electrifying the economy. We see that with more and more EVs, heat pumps, and so on. So we're not going to need these fossil fuels, and then these assets will be sitting, rusting hulks of steel on the coast, and then we'll have to pay to take them apart. So this is logic from the 1970s, and I feel like I just listened to a series of I feel like I'm in 1984 sometimes when I hear the federal government and provincial officials and people like ResourceWorks talking about LNG. Like it's propaganda, but it's not based on the latest science. It's not based on the latest analysis, and it's not in the interest of British Columbians.
What would be in the interest of British Columbians? What do we need to be investing in that is economically feasible, but is also environmentally feasible?
Yeah, so great question. We should be skating to where the puck's going, right? Which is renewable energy and electrifying the economy in every way we can, and developing those technologies for export. No one is saying China made the wrong bet by betting on electric vehicles, batteries, and renewables, because they're taking global markets by storm. We need to take those opportunities. Right now, we're just letting them slip away because we're doubling down on yesterday's economy, and I don't understand it.
I was going to say, why do you think that is? But
I think it's because the fossil fuel industry invests so much in lobbying, and they've met over 170 times with federal officials since the last federal election. And we've been trying to get into the Minister of Natural Resources office to talk to him, but we don't have the right business cards, I guess, to be able to have those conversations.
As I predicted, we have a lot of calls coming in, so I'd like to get to a few. Sandra in Esquimalt. Hi, Sandra. Thanks for calling in today.
Hello, and I am so happy to follow your expert. He has spoken really from my heart, and I think what is happening is people with knowledge, as he has demonstrated, have trickled down. That knowledge is in so many of us now. My husband and I are in our 70s, and yet we have dedicated our money towards a fully electric car. We built a geothermally heated house. I've worked with Dogwood to try and encourage land use and against pipelines. I am Métis, and I am aware that Indigenous people need to be consulted. And the federal government, who flies out here on its sort of rare occasions and declares decisions made, are making a big mistake by not listening and asking and really listening to Indigenous people. They don't want these pipelines. You may have found a few that do. I'd like to know why we are now just being given a decision.
And I appreciate you pointing that out, Sandra. And Thomas, as we know, the Nisga'a Indigenous peoples are on board with this project, but many Indigenous communities are not. How do we continue to move forward and making sure that, Indigenous communities and local populations are truly involved in any decisions that will impact where they live and where their families have ties to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a white guy talking on your show, following another old white guy talking on your show.
And I'm a older white woman, so what do we know?
But I know that, for instance, Tara Marsden, who's with the Gitnao, had hereditary chiefs, and she's been working on looking at the impacts of LNG and stewarding some studies and also their reaction to it. You know, they showed that this project does not pass their sustainability test.
Okay.
So, and they've tried to go to court to stop, you know, pipelines and whatnot happening on their territory. If we were picking projects, we see the BC government is actually announcing a bunch of clean energy projects, and those are being embraced enthusiastically by First Nations around the province. They're going to generate clean electricity that we can use to electrify our homes, our businesses, our industries, and that avoids us being exposed to global prices of fossil fuels that go up and down according to whatever wars are happening. So that really puts us in a good position. So that's why I'm saying there's all these opportunities if we really look at where global trends are going towards these better, cleaner technologies that you can manufacture at scale and keep coming down in cost. That's the crazy thing about them. Like, today's electric vehicles are expensive, but in 10 years, they're going to be so much cheaper.
And much
better.
cheaper than they were just a few years ago.
That's
even.
right. Yeah.
Another call that's come in from Sandy in Vancouver. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, thanks so much for talking about this issue today.
Yeah, of course.
I was fortunate enough to be on the North Coast in the Great Bear Sea this summer, and I saw many whales, humpback whales, and I saw the LNG platform in Kitimat when we finished our journey. And you know, these are such sensitive waters that are already filled with all kinds of vessels, from tourism vessels to cargo and one thing and another. And what's happening with this LNG project and others coming out of Kitimat or Prince Rupert is that they're creating noise, and for the whales, they're risking a spill of fuels or cargo. There are ship strikes. You know, we've had a number of humpbacks in the southern waters here struck in the last while.
Yeah,
a
just
Queen
in the
of
last
the
month.
North Ferry, or whatever it's called now, struck a humpback earlier this fall. And you know, I'd like somebody in Prince Rupert to take the Prime Minister and his entourage out on a boat tomorrow and go see what lives in the Great Bear Sea, and rethink some of these projects, because you know we're going to lose something very pristine. Yes, I'm happy there's not an oil pipeline, but I don't think that this LNG is any better. And I agree with your guest. We are way behind in terms of renewables, and we are not going to where the puck is. And, you know, I'm so disappointed that climate champion Mark Carney is such a huge disappointment. The only thing worthwhile to me in the climate competitiveness strategy last week was the introduction, we hope, of a youth climate corps. But the rest is just a throwback to times that as if we don't care. And COP30 is a joke. It's just a joke. The world has given up in so many ways, and Canada has given up.
All right.
And I think we can do better.
Thank you for that, Sandy. And, you know, you mentioned that you feel like we're having arguments from the 1980s when justifying a LNG pipeline. You know, do you see that as, you know, a mainly environmental issue that we're not getting the full picture on? Or is this, you know, part of a larger problem with how the federal government, you know, approaches development and public consultation? You know, as Sandy said, we need to get maybe the Prime Minister out there to see for himself the land he's making decisions about. Like, is there that disconnect that we aren't factoring in?
Yeah, I think there are two kinds of disconnects. I think it'd be great for him to tour the Great Bear Rainforest. I worked on that for 4 years, and it's such a beautiful, amazing place. I think the other disconnect is that he's not at COP30, and instead he's going to be in BC announcing yet another fossil fuel project. That, like, the
optics are not ideal.
Optics are not good. It shows Canada is not walking the talk. But I'd love Mark Carney to also be taken on a tour of all the facilities around the world that are pumping out this new electrotech, these heat pumps, these batteries, other technologies that are taking the world by storm. Like, there's now industrial heat pumps, which mean factories that need higher levels of heat don't need fossil fuels. They don't need natural gas. They can use clean electricity from renewables and generate the high temperature heat that they might need for their to run their factory.
Right. I've got an email here from Mary Ann. It says, is anybody noticing the glaciers are melting much faster than ever expected? So where is all the water going to come from to frack all these projects, to run the electricity needed? Hundreds of truckloads of water lined up for each frack when LNG Canada alone will need about 12,000 fracking wells. Methane from orphan wells is not even stopped by these gas companies. They've just been left leaking for us to pay for. Methane is 80 times more potent a CHG than CO2 in the first 20 years. What are we thinking? It can't work. That is from Mary Ann Shannon. We've got another call that's come in from Douglas in Dragon Lake. Hi, Douglas. What are your thoughts on the topic?
Hi there. I'm with Tom all the way on this, but I'd like to go further in terms of the solutions.
Okay.
Drill, baby, drill, build, baby, build, just leads to burn, baby, burn. I'm not too sure what planet your first guest was on, but we need global boiling, species decimation, habitat destruction, intergenerational inequality. These are just symptoms of overshoot. The fact that the lifestyles of the average North American, Canadian, American, and other countries is just way beyond the carrying capacity of the planet. So we need to simplify. We need to do that voluntarily. We need to do that societally. And that means getting into things like getting rid of our car addiction, move to fast, frequent, and free transit for everybody. We need to simplify the ways that we build places and heat our homes and grow our food and become self-sufficient. That's the only way our children and our grandchildren have any opportunity of surviving.
All right, Douglas, I thank you for that call. And we'll head now to Bowen Island, where we have a call from Anton. Hello, Anton.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Well,
Of course.
thank you, Douglas, for saying what he said, and your guest. Basically, because you asked earlier about what's economically feasible, why don't we ask what's ecologically feasible? What's the carrying capacity of our planet? And also, it's not a concern just for people who are concerned about the environment. If it's existential, it involves everyone. And I think we should really start to think about how can we live on this planet and be able to live on it and make it last. And as Dr. was saying, there's an overshoot happening. We're using far too much. And we have to really think about, okay, how are we going to change our society so future generations can live here too? That's really the fundamental thing. I have one other thing. We hear the oil and gas industry, and probably Stewart Muir also did it, that natural gas, LNG is cleaner than coal. What they do, it's a distraction. So they compare it to coal, but when you should be comparing LNG to hydro, nuclear energy, wind and solar, what you see then is that LNG is 100 to 160 times dirtier or emitting more greenhouse gases than those renewables do. So be really mindful of that. When compared to coal, they're distracting from the real issue. They should be compared to renewables always.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that point, Anton and Thomas. How would you respond to that?
I mean, it's a very good point. LNG is basically fracked methane that's chilled and exported abroad. So we're exporting fossil fuels. And, Stewart Muir also mentioned that we've got good regulations here. It's almost like, let's say Canada could grow opium and so we could export it to the world. Would we say it's okay to export opium or heroin to the world because we've got good regulations? The world has an addiction problem with fossil fuels. Right now, the solutions have suddenly become so much more affordable. So why would we feed that addiction, even if it gives us business opportunities for 5-10 years before the economy's transition? It's just a very short-sighted strategy. LNG is a fossil fuel. The science says we have no more room in the carbon budget. And every extra ton of LNG we export just makes our climate situation more precarious.
Okay, thank you for that. Lauren and Gabriela, you've got some thoughts on the LNG line.
Yes,
I just get a knot in my stomach when I hear everything going on. But I wanted to ask your guest from Suzuki, how is it that the public was well informed, according to polls 5 years ago, and they're less well informed now? I'm sure it is the campaign about the fossil fuel industry, and this seems to be the moment more successful than the tobacco industry in the end of that year. But when I was a kid, people would just say, smoking is no worse than breathing city air, and you can't. What are they going to make you stop breathing altogether? Those kind of arguments held for quite a while and made a lot of money for the tobacco companies. But I just want to ask him what he sees as the solution for the electorate and the population, which is becoming less informed every year in the midst of this massive campaign and effective campaign, unfortunately.
And I really, really appreciate you bringing up that point, Lauren, because I did want to ask you that, Thomas, we've seen that shift in the last few years. It seems to have happened almost quite quickly, that less and less people are putting those environmental issues at the top of their priorities. They are more concerned with affordability. They are more concerned with housing. How do you work against that through your work with the Suzuki Foundation?
Well, I mean, I totally understand it. Of course, affordability, of course, putting food on your table is going to be your first level issue. So as you're having a job and a future for your kids. But more fossil fuels makes our future less affordable because we are starting to affect crops that we're trying to grow. We are losing farms to floods. We are losing infrastructure, and then we're having to rebuild it. We're having to evacuate communities. So that's a very, important aspect of it. But the other thing is we've had the culture war raging to us to the south of the border and to a certain level up here in Canada. And there have been concerted efforts to say that renewables, don't work, or that the sun only shines during the day, so you'd go dark, which is ridiculous. So that messaging and that making it part of a cultural war and a populist attack to try and the fossil fuel industry is basically leveraging that and leveraging people being scared about their future to create this pushback. But when we do polling, we still have a lot of support there's so much support for renewables. Like right now, Canadians want to see investments in an east-west electricity grid that would allow us to plug in more renewables so we'd have cheap, affordable, reliable electricity.
We've got time for at least one more call from Jan in Langford. Hi, Jan.
Yeah, hi there. I'm really glad you brought this up, and you got an excellent David Suzuki speaker there. I think the cost is going to be the problem, and for me, and I used to teach environmental chemistry at Durham College in Oshawa back in Ontario. For me, it's going to be economic. We're moving electrification. Electrification is the direction we're moving, and we have to embrace the technology. And I think people are going to realize the costs are going to require them to embrace the technology. That's the only way we're going to get through this. Okay. And the technology is electrical.
All right.
So, yeah, not for this.
Thank you very much for that, Jan. And I think we can sneak in one last call. This one from David in Nanaimo. Hi, David.
Hi. Thanks so much. Excellent conversation. Just to add to it, we live at such an amazing moment in history when the cheapest way to produce energy is to point a piece of glass at the sun. And that's really what we should be celebrating. And it makes no sense for Canada to be thinking, kind of like a used car salesman of like, hey, somebody's going to buy this product or forcing this product on a market when the world is saying we are moving so fast, especially Asia, is moving so fast to with clean, renewable energy. It's kind of like saying, let's go all in on Blockbuster Video 20 years ago. That's the future. It makes about that much sense.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And we have had a couple of emails come in. Randy writes, frack is now a 4-letter word. I dropped the C because the K was less valuable. That and because the new word can become profanity more easily, which is where it belongs. Some strongly held thoughts from Randy there. And we are just about out of time. But, before I let you go, I think the big question is, if this does go forward, what what needs to be done to ensure the safety of the environment? What reassurances would you like to see?
It shouldn't go ahead. I mean, it's going to be more fossil fuels. We can do some things, like we need stronger oil and gas methane regulations. We can electrify these projects, but that's going to be hugely costly, and that means we wouldn't be able to electrify other portions of the economy. But I think our politicians need to start asking themselves, why are they doing industry like they're waiters to the oil and gas industry right now, rather than leading Canada to where we need to be going?
I think that is where we'll have to leave it for today, Thomas, but I thank you so much for coming in and speaking to me, but also answering so many questions from our public. Obviously, this subject top of mind for so many, and I did want to correct myself. I had previously said that Prime Minister Carney would be making his appearance tomorrow in Prince Rupert. It will actually be in Terrace. And again, thank you so much to everybody that did call in. Might have time for one last email. Mary says, I'm concerned that health impacts of LNG are being ignored and they impact us financially. A doctor in Dawson Creek stated oil workers, mainly young people, are being diagnosed with cancer at 7% higher rates than their age group with cancers. Thank you so much. That is it for our show today, but you can also email us bctoday@cbc.ca.